Chapter 14. This was the start of a period that blurs as I try to recall it. Incidents seem to cascade and merge. Events become feelings, feelings become events. Head and heart are contrary histories. The hot seat session was never aired. Mr. Rabinos destroyed the tape. Of course, that didn't stop every moment of it from being reported. In fact, most of the students knew about it by the time school opened the next day. What I recall then, when the last detail had been spilled, is a period of whispers and waiting. Tension. What would happen now? Would the jury's open hostility spill over into the classrooms? How would Stargirl react? Answers were expected on the following day, Valentine's Day. On previous holidays, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Groundhog's Day, Stargirl had left a little something on each desk in her homeroom. Would she do likewise this time? The answer was yes. Each member of Homeroom 17 found a candy heart on his or her desk that morning. There was a baseball game that night that I do remember. The biggest game of the year. The Electrons had breezed through the regular season undefeated, but now the second season was about to begin, the playoffs. First the districts, then the regionals, and finally the state tournament. We had never even made it to districts, but now visions of championships danced in our heads. The Electrons, champions of all Arizona, we would settle for nothing less. First hurdle on our way was Sun Valley, champions of the Pima League. The game was played Valentine's night on a neutral court in Casa Grande. All of Micah, it seemed, emptied out and headed for the game. Kevin and I went in the pickup. From the moment Micah Mom entered the gym, our cheers rattled the rafters. The big green M on Stargirl's white sweater flounced as she spun and leaped with the other cheerleaders. I spent as much time watching her as I did watching the game. She cheered when we scored. When Sun Valley scored, she did not. Something inside me felt better. But not for long. We were losing. For the first time all year, we were trailing at the end of the first quarter. In fact, we were getting smoked 21-9. The reason was no mystery. While Sun Valley's team was not as good as ours, they did have one thing we did not. A superstar. A kid named Ron Kovac. He stood 6'8" and averaged 30 points per game. Our players looked like five Davids flailing against Goliath. Sun Valley's lead had increased to 19 points midway through the second quarter. Our once raucous fans were stunned into silence, and that's when it happened. The ball was loose in the middle of the floor. Several players from each team dived for it. At that moment, Kovac was running past, trying to avoid the divers, and his right foot came down on a prone player's sneaker. So it was told in the newspapers the next day. At the time, it happened so fast no one saw it, though several people said they heard a sickening crack, like a twig snapping. All we knew was that suddenly Goliath was on the floor writhing and screaming, and his right foot looked all wrong, and the Sun Valley coaches and trainer and players were sprinting across the floor. But they were not the first. Stargirl, somehow, was already there. While Kovac's own cheerleaders sat gaping and stricken on their bench, Stargirl knelt on the hardwood floor. She held his head in her lap while the others attended his broken leg. Her hands moved over his face and forehead. She seemed to be saying things to him. When they carried him away on the stretcher, she followed. Everyone, both sides, stood and applauded. The Sun Valley cheerleaders leaped as if they had just scored 2 points. Ambulance lights flashed in the high windows. I knew why I was applauding, but I wondered about some of the Micah fans. Were they really standing in tribute, or because they were happy to see him go? The game resumed. Stargirl returned to the cheerleaders' bench without Kovac. Sun Valley was a pushover. By early in the second half, we took the lead and went on to win easily. 2 nights later, we lost to Glendale. Again, we fell farther and farther behind as the first half went on. But this time, there was no turnaround in the second half. This time, the Electrons faced not one, but 5 players better than themselves. This time, no opponent broke an ankle, though I'm sure in our desperation, some of us secretly wished for it. We were shocked. We couldn't believe it. And then, as the seconds of the fourth quarter ticked by, we did believe. The cheers from across the gym were like volleys of arrows piercing our grand illusions. How could we have been so stupid? Did we really think little Micah, undefeated in its own third-rate league, could ever stand up to the big city powerhouses around the state? We had been lured into great foolish expectations, suckered. We were devastated. It had been so wonderful to be winners and so right for us. Winning, we had come to believe, was our destiny. And now, as the Glendale coach set in the scrubs to mop us up, Micah girls wept. Boys cursed and booed. Some blamed the officials, or the nets, or the lights. The cheerleaders, to their credit, kept on cheering. They looked up at us with glistening eyes and mascara tracks on their cheeks. They pumped their arms and shouted and did everything their cheerleaders were supposed to do. But their gestures were empty, their hearts not in it, except for Stargirl. As I watched her intently, I could see that she was different. Her cheeks were dry. There was no crack in her voice, no sag in her shoulders. From the start of the second half on, she never sat down, and she never looked at the game. She turned her back to the court. She stood and faced us and gave not an ounce of herself to the jubilation across the gym. We were losing by 30 points with a minute to go, but she cheered as if we had a chance. Her eyes blazed with ferocity I have never seen before. She shook her fist at us. She flung her defiance at our gloom. And then her face was bloody. A Glendale player had just dunked the ball, and Kevin pounded my knee with his fist, and I looked to see Stargirl's face, suddenly a bloody mask, and I was at my feet screaming, "No!" But it wasn't blood. It was a tomato. Someone had splattered her face with a perfectly thrown ripe tomato. And as the clock expired and the Glendale fans poured into the court, Stargirl just stood there, her great eyes staring up at us in utter bewilderment through the pulpy red gore. Sprouts of bitter laughter erupted among us, even some applause. The next morning at home, I found the card. It was in a school notebook that apparently I had not opened for several days. It was a valentine, one of those little cut-out third-grade sorts, showing a blushing little boy and a girl with Mary Jane shoes and a big red heart between them, and the words, "I love you." And as the third graders and high schoolers often do, the sender had signed in code.